domestic sales and vacating much-needed import duties on the port, a policy that it has been quietly reversing since COVID-19, to outright calling for the boycott on private tax-paying, job-creating private sector entities. In the economic depression of COVID-19 era, the government pretends it now needs the private sector, which pays taxes, feeds us, provides utilities and other critical services, by masquerading an economic stimulus plan that is lackluster at best. That was further cemented in a very anemic kind of budget presentation, which was devoid of any major macroeconomic impact for the budget year. We heard how hard things are and how much we should be grateful for the little that has been done. Even the main highlight, a $30 million facility for micro and mid-sized, medium-sized businesses, could only muster a $4 million contribution in this budget year. This micro amount does not even meet the threshold of medium-sized and turns out to be more of a joke rather than economic stimulation. The incompetence of the policy came glaring through as the Minister of Finance sought to introduce this measure to this House in a national budget.
5 more minutes, sir.
But still has to meet with potential participants as to just under what terms he will allow the micro $4 million, them to access the $4 million. This was rushed and intended to put some color into an otherwise pale budget. You said 10 minutes, Mr. Speaker? Oh, okay. It's down to 4. Mr. Speaker. Yep, Mr. Speaker. Let me just leave with this honorable House the fact that the economic decline and uncertainty, which we heard a lot about yesterday in the world today, scripted by the COVID-19 pandemic, is yet another opportunity to press the reset button on our sacred national endeavor to earn a worthwhile place in the international trade of goods and services. Let's bring all hands on deck, especially the youth and our brothers and sisters in the diaspora. Dominica has to get into bigger markets, and the shift towards online marketing as well as delivery of goods and services. So this digitization of Dominica that we've been hearing about, okay, let's see. It needs to progress at a faster pace. I heard the Prime Minister say yesterday that there's $75 million that has been secured for investment in it, but I only see $15 million worth of work for operationalizing digital Dominica in the next 3 years. $4 million this budget year, $5.5 million in each of the other 2 budget years. Because we have to end the era of willful ignorance of science and technology and contentment with leadership malpractice and mediocrity. That must end urgently. Dominica is looking at massive collapse in revenues in the next fiscal year. Time is of the essence. Billions of people all over the world are facing exactly the same challenge and are rushing into these open niches. The pandemic has made a lot of physical delivery of services problematic and has democratized the world by putting everyone online for many types of services. This has an impact on tourism, but it opens up many other opportunities. So, Mr. Speaker, let us monetize the diaspora as a market for current Dominican agriculture, other products and services. Agriculture, including cannabis, which is rapidly being legalized across the USA and in many other rich countries. Young people want to make money. Agriculture needs the energizing impact of science and technology to make the God-given backbone of our economy cool and youth-friendly. Agriculture will secure our health and our wellness by making us self-sufficient in natural food and drink and providing plant-based solutions to our medical needs. By sharing these blessings, Mr. Speaker, with a world in need, we will grow our economy and generate wealth like we have never seen before. We want to see...
One more minute.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, I just want to say that reference to the cannabis industry, our holistic approach is to building a viable industry that will protect traditional stakeholders and ensure no interest group is left behind in sharing the health, the wellness, and economic development benefits. A share of the global legal cannabis market, which is estimated at $15 billion, can deliver the lift we desperately need for the rural economy and strong livelihood restoration. As such, our agenda for change has the legalization of cannabis for personal, sacramental, medicinal, and industrial use, with a strict regulation to protect our children as a pillar to revive the vital agricultural sector in Dominica as a fundamental part of the overall strategy for economic resilience. Mr. Speaker.
Your time is up. I'll give you 30 seconds to wind up.
Yeah. COVID-19, a virus in the kingdom of our Father who art in heaven, came down to enforce his will on earth as it is in heaven. It stopped the world and led us back to the silence of soul, reflection, introspection for forward action based on the principles of good Christian living. And so today, we pray not for the Lord to answer our prayers, but for the strength and courage to pray his answers into our reality. It was Martin Carter, Mr. Speaker, who wrote, "Dew is awake, morning is soon. Mankind is risen, flowers will bloom. May the ancestors be pleased." Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah, you could stay in your seat. Yeah, so my eyes fall on the Honorable Minister for Trade, Commerce, Entrepreneurship, Innovation, Business and Export Development, Honorable Ian Douglas.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to give my support to the 2020-2021 national budget before us and to make my contribution to this debate. Mr. Speaker, the budget is set in a context, or the first budget really, of the new term of this regime, Mr. Speaker, the Labour Party government. And the 17th budget, I believe, being delivered by the Honourable Prime Minister, Dr. Roosevelt Skerrit. Aptly phrased and coined, fostering economic resilience, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I sat struggling through the response of the leader of the opposition, Mr. Speaker, in pain, really. Because the budget itself, Mr. Speaker, is hinged on fostering economic resilience. And the pith and substance of what was delivered, Mr. Speaker, yesterday is yet to be addressed by the leader of the opposition. And I think he in the dying moments of the presentation, he failed at an attempt to address the issues upon which the budget has been premised, Mr. Speaker. And I will allude to that as we go along. Mr. Speaker, this budget, like many others before, it comes at a time of tremendous challenge for Dominicans. And I think that is clear. I don't think any one of us in Dominica, or even those looking at us, Mr. Speaker, from afar, has any doubts about the challenges that Dominica has had to face, more than perhaps any other country in the Eastern Caribbean in recent past, Mr. Speaker. We had, if you want to go back, we had the trough of 2015, which devastated, I believe, Massac and those areas, Mr. Speaker. Before we could recover from that, we had the tropical storm Erica, I believe it was in 2017, Mr. Speaker, which in 15, thank you, in 15, Mr. Speaker, which totally devastated certain communities. And I will point out, Mr. Speaker, that God bless, we have the citizenship by investment program, and we have the housing option, which totally reconstituted and reconstructed an entire community of Pititsavan in Belvis-Chopin, Mr. Speaker. And before we could even recover from that, Mr. Speaker, we had the monster Hurricane Maria, which totally wiped out 220% of our GDP. 220% of our GDP, Mr. Speaker, and those of us who witness it will bear me out that that was total destruction. That is in the context in which this budget, Mr. Speaker, has been crafted by this government, Mr. Speaker. It reminds me, Mr. Speaker, what we are going through now and where we are right now, Mr. Speaker, reminds me of when we came to office in 2000. I'm fortunate enough to have been in this house when we were grappling with the economic crisis that we had to face. And that is the legacy of this government. When the history of this government is written 20 and 30 years from now, Mr. Speaker, one thing that will be noted is the success that this government has enjoyed from one challenge after another, Mr. Speaker, because of astute leadership in this country. Leadership in this country. The United Workers' Party cannot run away from the fact, Mr. Speaker, that they brought this country to the brink of collapse. And even today, listening to them and listening to the responses of the leader of the opposition, there is no evidence to show me that had they been in power, Mr. Speaker, the same thing would not have happened in this country. I mean, can any one of us picture the United Workers' Party handling this COVID pandemic that we found ourselves in, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister showed absolute and astute leadership even before the COVID-19 pandemic. When he decided to choose his slate of candidates, Mr. Speaker, he chose one of the best medical professionals in Dominica, Mr. Speaker, not knowing that we would have had a medical challenge on our hands in the person of the Minister of Health. That is foresight and that is vision, Mr. Speaker. And this was the first disaster that this government had to face, this regime had to face. An economic disaster of epic proportions, Mr. Speaker, brought about by the COVID-19. That is what we had to deal with, you know. It wasn't just a health crisis or a global crisis, you know. The COVID pandemic literally shut down, Mr. Speaker, the global supply chains. Mr. Speaker, I listened to the leader of the opposition. And one thing that we must know, the leader of the opposition was always in the background advising the then United Workers' Party. He was always there. He was always there. So for him to come into this house today, and he didn't even give us options. He didn't give us alternatives. What he would have done, and the alternatives that he put forward, Mr. Speaker, was absent, was devoid of any clear path, was empty, Mr. Speaker. No options, no alternatives, Mr. Speaker. And that is what United Workers' Party has been all about. That's their legacy. You know, when the leader of the opposition alludes to the attempts at this government to revive the economy and the monies placed at the aid bank and the investment in agriculture, Mr. Speaker, and what we are doing to bolster the economy, where was the leader of the opposition between 95 and 2000? I heard him speaking about the international airport and attempts to pay the landowners in the Wesley Marigot area for the lands so that in earnest we could start building the international airport. Mr. Speaker, where was the leader of the opposition? Where was the leader of the opposition when the United Workers' Party went to Trinidad, Citibank, and Royal Merchant Bank, if I'm not mistaken, and borrowed monies at commercial rates at 14%? borrowed how much? $150 million in July or August of 1991, Mr. Speaker. And by the time this government came to office in 2000, the Treasury was absolutely empty, Mr. Speaker. And now, Mr. Speaker, I put that into context, and now, 20 years later, we have to be undergoing the pains of investing and building the international airport, Mr. Speaker. That is why I'm putting that into context. We have to pay back that debt. And still now, Mr. Speaker, in this budget, we're speaking about building the international airport because of the mismanagement of the United Workers' Party. The aid bank was on the brink of collapse. I'm hearing the leader of the opposition speaking about monies placed at the aid bank, Mr. Speaker, for small business. Mr. Speaker, the United Workers' Party, same thing again, the venture capital fund. Monies got from STABEX funds and from the Taiwanese government at the time, Mr. Speaker. And government ministers were the ones applying for those same loans, Mr. Speaker, competing with the same private sector that they trying to align with and to support today, Mr. Speaker. And it is this government that has placed this economy back on track. This government that has made the sacrifices, Mr. Speaker, to bring Dominica back from rubble and ashes several times due to adverse climatic conditions. Several times. The tropical storm Erica, Hurricane Maria, Mr. Speaker, the COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. Speaker, just in January of 2020, the IMF, the IMF, no less an authority than the International Monetary Fund, said that the economy was set to expand, Mr. Speaker. That was the trajectory of the Dominican economy. That is where we were, Mr. Speaker. The economy was set to expand, Mr. Speaker. That was proper management of the Dominican economy. The economy was set to expand. But again, Mother Nature. Again, fate, Mr. Speaker, the COVID-19 pandemic. The government barely had time to settle down. We came to office in December 6. We were not even sworn in. We were sworn in somewhere in January, Mr. Speaker. And lo and behold, less than a month later, we had to deal with the COVID pandemic. But yet, for another time, the government sprang into action. The government took the bull by the horns, Mr. Speaker. And we see the results of the handling of another crisis today. Dominica is recorded as one of the countries in the world to have done the best as far as the management of the COVID-19 pandemic is concerned. But the leader of the opposition, true to himself, Mr. Speaker, he couldn't help himself. He couldn't help himself. That is the nature of the leader of the opposition. I remember it must have been in March when we just had the first view of the approaching pandemic, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister, again, with his wisdom, his foresight, and his direction, called a national consultation of the entire country, a bipartisan consultation. Just like what we had done after Erica, Mr. Speaker. We invited the opposition up to the cabinet room, and we sat to discuss to have a bipartisan, collaborative and collective effort to the challenges that Dominica face. That is what the Prime Minister is all about. Mr. Speaker, the leader of the opposition was preaching doom and gloom. He said that we would be inflicted with how much? 5,000 COVID. How much? 15,000 COVID cases. And how much he said would die? He said 7,000 people must die, Mr. Speaker. That is a leader. That's a leader, Mr. Speaker. Preaching doom and gloom. And up to now, Mr. Speaker, Jig Jordi translated, all like a day like today, Mr. Speaker, the leader of the opposition have never come back to the people of Dominica and say that he was wrong on his predictions, Mr. Speaker. He was very wrong, Mr. Speaker. Throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, Mr. Speaker, I saw myself and my colleagues being led by the Honorable Prime Minister.
Members, let's minimize the asides. Yeah? Continue.
Being led by the Prime Minister, going out, meeting our constituents, talking to our constituents, going and check for the elderly, for the infirmed, for the housebound, Mr. Speaker. We see the leader of the opposition coming here with a litany of requests for the Marigot constituency. That's how we started, Mr. Speaker. His duty was to go out and to champion the cause of his people, but he didn't do that during the COVID-19 pandemic. In fact, the leader of the opposition is on record as saying that I'm not going into that fish market, going to the Prime Minister to ask for things for Marigot. It's like a fish market. He's on record as saying that, Mr. Speaker. The leader of the opposition has not shown that he's interested in the development of Marigot or he's interested in the development of anywhere in Dominica, for that matter, Mr. Speaker. And we can show that the leader of the opposition is yet to go and visit the new Marigot hospital that is nearing completion now, Mr. Speaker. That is the work of this government. The Marigot Hospital is nearing completion, and the Marigot Health Center is nearing completion, Mr. Speaker. The leader of the opposition should come here today and support the building of the international airport, because his constituency will be a direct beneficiary, Mr. Speaker, like the rest of the country, of the international airport. That is what he should have come here this morning and advocate, Mr. Speaker, and champion the cause of the international airport. But instead, we didn't hear that from the leader of the opposition. The leader of the opposition started by lamenting that Marigot is deprived of infrastructure, Mr. Speaker. There has been monies placed at the Marigot Village Council for infrastructural development, Mr. Speaker, that sat in the Marigot Village Council untouched for months, Mr. Speaker. That is what the leader of the opposition and the member for Marigot should concern himself with. So, Mr. Speaker, that is the context in which the budget this year is being framed, Mr. Speaker. That is the context. And that is what we will continue, Mr. Speaker, to focus on. To energize the economy, Mr. Speaker. To make the resources available to the ordinary Dominican man in every facet of life, Mr. Speaker, to push the economy. And that is why we see millions of dollars being spent, even in agriculture, Mr. Speaker. The cocoa rehabilitation and the cocoa expansion, that is direct benefit to the farmers of this country, Mr. Speaker. $1.6 million. $1.6 million, Mr. Speaker, spent on the rehabilitation of cassava processing facilities, toloma processing facilities, bay oil, Mr. Speaker. I was shocked when I looked at the records, when I was researching and preparing, Mr. Speaker. I was shocked that bay oil generated more than $1 million just in the COVID months, between January, February of this year, 2020, and May. Bay oil alone generated $1.6 million, Mr. Speaker. So in spite of the COVID pandemic, this government has been able to keep persons at work and generating revenue and generating income, Mr. Speaker. This is what this government is all about. And that is what concerns us every day, Mr. Speaker. That is what we are concerned about, Mr. Speaker. And the leader of the opposition, Mr. Speaker, who could have foreseen Tropical Storm Erica? Who could have foreseen Tropical Storm Erica? From nowhere, Mr. Speaker, at 4 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock in the morning, Mr. Speaker, 10 inches of rain. On Dominicans, 11 o'clock, the Minister for Foreign Affairs was championing the cause of his people at the time. Who could have foreseen, Mr. Speaker, Hurricane Maria? Who could have foreseen Maria that came upon Dominica and sat upon Dominica for hours, dumping wind and rain with a ferocity that had never before been experienced, Mr. Speaker, in the history, not only of Dominica, but of natural disasters in the world. Who could have foreseen COVID, Mr. Speaker? That's why we should be here today during this budget in a bipartisan effort, Mr. Speaker, championing the measures outlined by the Honorable Prime Minister in the budget. That is what we should have been doing. But instead, and I hope that the contribution of the Leader of the Opposition is not not setting the stage for what is to come from the rest of the members of the opposition. I really hope not, Mr. Speaker, because when you see things like the loan facility at the aid bank to assist the manufacturing sector, Mr. Speaker, a loan being made so that they could purchase all of the local material. Now the farmers can go and plant all of the peppers for pepper sauce of Hot Rose and Big G's and all of the others, Mr. Speaker. That is what the government is all about. Mr. Speaker, all the passion fruits, the farmers can go now and plant all the passion fruit so we can get that, Mr. Speaker, to turn into passion fruit syrup. All of the coconut oil that goes through. Mr. Speaker, there's an underground economy, really, that happens between Dominica and the French islands, where hucksters go with their bags of things like coconut oil and castor oil and this thing, Mr. Speaker, generating serious revenue for the ordinary man. And this government is saying that we're going to invest in those things. So
remember, you'd like to say underground or informal? Informal,
Mr. Speaker, informal economy. Where,
so you'd like to withdraw?
Yes, underground and informal, Mr. Speaker.
Okay.
An informal economy going on between Dominica and those countries. Little ordinary persons all over Dominica, in rural Dominica, engaged in those cottage industries. Mr. Speaker, do you know that since the government placed those monies at the aid bank, Mr. Speaker, $1.6 million have been dispersed, Mr. Speaker. $1.6 million, ordinary Dominican folk all over Dominica, Mr. Speaker. And that reminds me, of in 1996-97, we had diplomatic relations with Taiwan at the time, the province, the village in China, in the People's Republic of China, Mr. Speaker. And there was money placed at the aid bank. Also, too, we had gotten some money from the European Union under STABEC funds, Mr. Speaker. Because of what United Workers' Party had done, we had started seeing the first light of the demise of the banana industry. So we had gotten some monies from the European Union to bolster those who had lost their income from the banana fallout, called STABEC funds. And that was placed at the aid bank called the Venture Capital Fund, very much like we have monies now being placed at the aid bank. And Mr. Speaker, do you know that it was government ministers and the hierarchy of the United Workers' Party who applied for those loans at the aid bank at the time, Mr. Speaker, who wanted to establish crusher in Marigot because the international airport was coming up.
So you need to put context and relevance.
Yes, so I'm showing that this government now is placing monies at the aid bank, Mr. Speaker. But the difference is that no government minister will be applying for any loan, Mr. Speaker. It will be ordinary Dominicans, Mr. Speaker. Ordinary Dominicans involved in manufacturing benjo, CMOS, blows, teas, Mr. Speaker. These are the kind of people who will be eligible, Mr. Speaker, to get those monies, Mr. Speaker. Unlike the 1995-2000 period, Mr. Speaker, when those monies are being applied for by United Workers' Party government ministers and hierarchy, Mr. Speaker. That is the difference between the two parties. So we're listening to the leader of the opposition here, Mr. Speaker. The leader of the opposition is conjuring up again. He tried the 1.2 billion, Mr. Speaker. The people of Dominica debunked the 1.2 million at the general elections. So he upped the ante now, Mr. Speaker. He said, if you lie, Mr. Speaker, tell a big lie. Don't tell a little lie. So people will be convinced. He said, no, not 1.2 anymore, $1.6 billion, Mr. Speaker. And the leader of the opposition knows of all of the apartment buildings that I just alluded to Petit Savan, Mr. Speaker, people were left homeless. You know what it is to lose your family member in a disaster, in a tragedy? Mud buried your people where you couldn't find them, Mr. Speaker. You went to the bank after you work hard and save. You take a mortgage of $500,000 to build your home. I know young persons like myself. There's a young man, very good friend of the member for Petit Savan, the Minister for Foreign Affairs, who went to the bank and took a mortgage, $450,000, built his home, Mr. Speaker, and the disaster of Tropical Storm Erica devastated not only the homes, but the dreams, the hopes, and the aspirations of the Petit Savan people. And the government, in its goodness, Mr. Speaker, formulated a strategy and a plan under the Citizenship by Investment program to rebuild, not homes, Mr. Speaker, not homes, not houses, Mr. Speaker, to rebuild the lives of those people who had lost all that they had worked for. And you come into this house as the leader of the opposition and you criticizing the homes being built under the Citizenship by Investment program. Mr. Speaker, I myself almost lost my job. Mr. Speaker, just yesterday we had a conversation at lunch, and some of my colleagues were telling me they don't know how the Prime Minister didn't fire me after that Georgetown debacle, Mr. Speaker. My colleagues told me, Mr. Speaker, that I was like a guerrilla soldier somewhere, Mr. Speaker, in Central America or the Middle East, Mr. Speaker. That is how my colleagues termed it, Mr. Speaker. Championing the cause of the Georgetown people in Glanville, who the same Dominican Labour Party had promised the lands in Glanville for years, and we could not get those lands because we chose to support the Dominican Labour Party, even in the years of opposition. The people of Cotton Hill, Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker, the honorable member for the Cottage constituency, the longest serving member in this house, promised the people of Lagos and Cotton Hill and Buck for years that they would be given the lands. Today, the government formulated a strategy through the Citizenship by Investment program. And all over Dominica, look, the member for the Mao constituency, Mr. Speaker, homes being built in Jimmy, Mr. Speaker, all over. And when I went to Grand Fort, Mr. Speaker, Grand Fort, the houses, that's why I started, you know. I started in Georgetown. You don't know where Georgetown is? Come down to Portsmouth. You tell me about my constituency. Georgetown is in the Portsmouth constituency. I don't want to get distracted. It's because of the truth. In Grand Fort, I mean, when we went to Cannabis, and this man, this old man, the man must have been about 80 years old, and he came with his banjo, and he started playing, "Thank God for all the blessings," and tears came to my eyes, Mr. Speaker. That is the work of the Honorable Prime Minister, Dr. Roosevelt Skerrit, and the Dominican Labour Party. But in true United Workers' Party opposition form, Mr. Speaker, that's why the member for the Roseau North is getting so agitated, you know, Mr. Speaker. That's why he's getting so agitated, Mr. Speaker. Because the opposition doesn't want to see anything good happen in the Commonwealth of Dominica, Mr. Speaker, because this government will get the credit for it. That is what it is. That is how they are. They wrote to President Hugo Chavez when he was alive at the time, telling him, stop giving Dominica monies, Mr. Speaker. They wrote to the UN, Mr. Speaker. I can go further back. When the United States government, after Miss Charles was the Caribbean champion after the Grenada Revolution, she went to the White House, and Ronald Reagan, the President of America at the time, promised that he would send the U.S. Army Corps here in Dominica to help to build the international airport. Edison James, Mr. Speaker, wrote to the U.S. government in 1990, dissuading the United States government from coming here to help us with the international airport. This is the record and the legacy of the United Workers' Party in this country.
Member, You can call his name. He's not here to defend
I
himself.
withdraw it. I take it back, Mr. Speaker. I withdraw, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we're talking about sovereignty, sovereignty and identity. Sovereignty and identity. The leader of the opposition talking about sovereignty and identity, Mr. Speaker, with regard to the Citizenship by Investment program. Mr. Speaker, in 1993, when we saw the impending demise of the banana industry, and the United Workers' Party was telling the farmers they will give them $1 a pound for their bananas. The brilliant Mary Eugenia Charles of blessed memory devised the citizenship program, Mr. Speaker, the economic citizenship program. That's where it all started. And immediately the United Workers' Party went on a rampage. The Lion River Hotel would have been built already. And we know the leader of the opposition always has things in his mind, in his head, in his opinion. He went all the way to the Privy Council and told the Privy Council that it was in his head. It is his opinion, Mr. Speaker. All to denigrate the Honorable Prime Minister at the time, Mr. Speaker, and to put the economic citizenship program as it was then in bad light. And what did they do? Lo and behold, God is not a police. He granted them victory at the polls in 1995. And they didn't scrap the program, you know. So when you hear him here criticizing the Citizenship by Investment program and the housing option that is associated with it, it's not because they think it is bad, you know. They think that everything this government does that will put the government in good standing with the electorate of Dominica is another 5 years in opposition for the United Workers' Party. And that is why they oppose it. Not like true statesmen. Like to say, if something is good for Dominica, stand up and champion the cause. Let history record you. Let the Hansards of this honorable house record you as supporting what is good for the people of Dominica. But no, they criticized it, Mr. Speaker. And lo and behold, the Freedom Party lost the 1995 election. And what we saw, as soon as they came to office, instead of scrapping the program, they changed it, and they said they remodeled it, Mr. Speaker, and called it the re-engineered citizenship program. Mr. Speaker, and this program right now is the Labour Party, this government and this Prime Minister who rescued the program, you know, who rescued the program. And the program now is being properly run, Mr. Speaker. The monies generated for the investments in, like, let's start with the Lion River Hotel, that was the first one. Mr. Speaker, the Act speaks about an escrow account. So for the leader of the opposition now to be coming here and tell us the monies for the housing option is not placed in the Treasury, but the monies for the real estate option is not placed in the Treasury, Mr. Speaker. It's placed in an escrow account managed, Mr. Speaker, by government officials. No minister, no politician, as was the case in the 1995-2000 period, can sign any check from the Citizenship by Investment account, Mr. Speaker. But Grace Tong and Edison James had the economic citizenship checkbook walking around in their back pocket, Mr. Speaker. Yes, but, at that time, Mr. Speaker,
but you cannot,
I withdraw.
Yes,
I withdraw,
the names,
Speaker.
the names.
I withdraw, Mr. Speaker. That is the facts and the history, Mr. Speaker. And we see this government formulated a plan after Tropical Storm Erica to rebuild, like I said, not just the lives, but the home, not just the homes, but the lives of the Pidgin Savan people. We came up with the novel, and you big thank you, we came up with the novel idea of the housing option, Mr. Speaker. And now the leader of the opposition, he is not satisfied that the 1.2 billion was debunked. Now he's coming up now with the 1.6 billion. And we're using that same method to do the hospital, Mr. Speaker. I don't want to get into diplomatic muddy waters, Mr. Speaker, but a foreign government had promised us some monies to do the Marigot Hospital. So we were bent focused on building the Marigot Hospital in earnest from day one. But But when we saw what the foreign government was giving us, Mr. Speaker, and what we ourselves, our own vision, what we wanted for the Marigot Health District, it's not a Marigot hospital, you know, and we must get that clear, you know. It's the Marigot Health District involving the Kalinago territory, Mr. Speaker, Cassie Bruce, Mr. Speaker, Wesley. That is what it is. It's the Northeast Health Facility, Mr. Speaker, that happens to be in Marigot. That's what we are doing. And we must call it by its name, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I mean, you know, and the leader of the opposition is just carrying on in true to form. He's talking about sovereignty and identity in the hands of Mr. Speaker, I am old enough to remember characters like Al-Masari and Christopher Skase. I don't have the time to go into all of that, Mr. Speaker. That is the legacy of United Workers' Party. And more recently, Mr. Speaker, one of the most reputed media outlets in the world, in the person of Al Jazeera, came to Dominica and told us that the leader of the opposition was implicated in a conspiracy to sell Dominican diplomatic appointments, even though he wasn't even in government yet, Mr. Speaker. Kwedi, Mr. Speaker. That is what you're doing. Kwedi, Mr. Speaker. And you come in here now telling us about sovereignty and identity. Sovereignty and identity. And you want to make a stranger a diplomat in Dominica, a man you have not met, a person you don't know, Mr. Speaker. Your signature is the ink hadn't dried on the memorandum of understanding, Mr. Speaker. We have it. These are the facts of the matter. You know, when we listen to the leader of the opposition this morning, I'm wondering, but I fell asleep and didn't get up, man. I'm dreaming, Mr. Speaker. I don't understand that at all. I don't understand that at all, Mr. Speaker. So when the leader of the opposition pulled a con job on, or tried, he didn't succeed because the result of the election shows that he didn't succeed. He tried to pull a con job with the 1.2 billion. It didn't work. Now he's coming back, Mr. Speaker, because he cannot address the comprehensive package of measures get towards the stimulation of the economy, Mr. Speaker. He up in the ante now, and he's talking about $2.4 billion, Mr. Speaker. But the people of Dominica knows better. The people of Dominica knows better, Mr. Speaker. And they know because they show by their overwhelming support, 18-3 at the polls, that they understand what good and accountable government means. A government of progress, of vision in this country. That is what we are all about, Mr. Speaker. We are all about generating revenue. When we see the ideas that this Prime Minister and this government comes up with are so novel that it bamboozles the opposition, Mr. Speaker. They don't understand. We're talking about the Dominica Entrepreneurship Visa, which, if you understand the Citizenship by Investment Program, is a brilliant idea. It's another version again. So in the next budget now, he'll add another 1.2 billion to the Entrepreneurship Visa. Wait, mark my words. In the next budget, he's coming back again, because the Dominica Entrepreneurship Visa will allow all of our economic citizens out there, Mr. Speaker, to look at what Dominica is doing and invest in a particular project in Dominica, invest in a business. So investor will look and say, wow, that guy, that cocoa stick, he comes to Dominica's authority, that cocoa stick makes some good cocoa tea. Wow, that bay oil thing can go far in the pharmaceutical industry. We can make some perfumes and stuff on that. That marijuana has some good potential marijuana oil, Mr. Speaker. So the organic marijuana oil. So the economic citizens, Mr. Speaker, will be granted a Dominica Entrepreneurship Visa where they will be able to invest. So that is a novel way of raising funding needed to pursue the developmental goals of the Commonwealth of Dominica, Mr. Speaker. That is what it's all about. So that is why I support the Entrepreneurship Visa program. And that is why I support the housing option, because I have seen what it has done for my constituency and for other constituencies around Dominica. So I support it wholeheartedly, Mr. Speaker. $23.3 million investment in the micro, small, and medium-sized, Mr. Speaker.
23 more minutes, 23.
Mr. Speaker. Medium, micro, small, and medium enterprise. That is what will drive the economy in the short to medium term. We're going to be investing, Mr. Speaker, and you yourself, you know about that, Mr. Speaker. In your other life, you were a champion in small business, Mr. Speaker. You championed the cause of your various pie rock pizza, and you had a lovely bakery in Portsmouth, Mr. Speaker, making good bread. Mr. Speaker, these are the things that Mr. Speaker, and these are the things that the young people of Dominica, I want them to emulate, Mr. Speaker. I sat and I listened to the Prime Minister's Anupale program that he has on Sunday, and I find that is a very good program. It's a very, and I must commend him on it. I must commend him on that because one of the first persons he brought was a young chap from my constituency, Mr. Carrier, who again is involved in information technology, having gotten his grounding and his training, Mr. Speaker, with Ross University. He has now gone out now and established his own business and using IT in his business, in his vegetable production, Mr. Speaker. And I found that he really gave a great insight in the Prime Minister's program. On Sunday again, the Prime Minister had some young, sharp businessmen blazing a trail in Dominica. And when I see, Mr. Speaker, $23 million being made available to the micro and small enterprise industry for small business development, I think that is absolutely wonderful. $30 million. $30 million over 3 years at 1%. And I believe the budget said that the first $4 million will be made available in this fiscal year. That is money in circulation in the economy, Mr. Speaker. I mean, there is so much that this government is doing. It will take me the rest of the day to enunciate and enumerate all of the measures outlined in this 2020-2021 budget, Mr. Speaker, that the government is doing. And Mr. Speaker, my time is running out and I really need to touch on this issue before I sit, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have been in politics, in active politics since 2000, when my uncle Rosie died. And I have been not involved on the front line, but I have been involved in it all my life, since I was born. The first time I spoke on a political platform was in 1979, approaching the 1980 elections, Mr. Speaker, for the split faction of the Labour Party called the Democratic Labour Party under Oliver Serafin, Mr. Speaker. Why do I say that, Mr. Speaker? I have seen firsthand my father and my uncle struggle in politics. Mr. Speaker, I have seen the father of the nation, Edward Oliver LeBlanc, who gave to Dominica so much: roads, Deepwater Harbor, the ministry building, Mr. Speaker, secondary schools, Mr. Speaker. I have seen politicians, after they leave politics, Mr. Speaker, labor and languish in squalor, Mr. Speaker, to make ends meet. I have seen ministers of government become security officers now, and not because I don't have any particular prejudices, against an honest job that a man does, Mr. Speaker. But I'm just saying, Mr. Speaker, that our politics is a thankless task, Mr. Speaker. And a man that left here in wet shoes, wet socks, Mr. Speaker, he had to call friends to buy clothes for him to go and address the United Nations after Hurricane Maria, Mr. Speaker. The man sacrificed his wife. She's now in politics. Mr. Speaker, the people are living in a conference room right now, a conference room, a meeting room, Mr. Speaker. They have infant children, Mr. Speaker. The place is infested with mold, giving the children allergies, Mr. Speaker. Where is our conscience? Mr. Speaker, we're talking about $32,000, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the rest of the region, Mr. Speaker, every single head of state is respected and accorded the amenities befitting the office of the head of government, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the head of government has to entertain his colleague heads of state. People come into Dominica at that level, Mr. Speaker. What must the head of state do? Mr. Speaker, that is the context in which we must place this argument. We must rise up as a people. We must raise our consciousness as a people. We are small, we are poor, but we are dignified people, Mr. Speaker. And we must behave as such, Mr. Speaker, for us to be here in this honorable house, Mr. Speaker. I'm making qualms about a residence for the Honorable Prime Minister. A Prime Minister of 15 years, sacrifice, came from school as a top student, could have got a job at any university around the world. No, Mr. Speaker, and have sacrificed his youth, sacrificed his vigor, Mr. Speaker, to serve the people of this country, Mr. Speaker. And we hear making qualms, we hear making heavy weather about that, Mr. Speaker. That is why in this budget we speak about the reclassification of the public service. Because you have top public servants, Mr. Speaker, working Mr. Speaker, we're not paying our people in Dominica. We're not paying our people in Dominica for the kind of work that they're doing. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I am not worried about the member for Roseau.
Member, no. I mean, this is an honorable house. Every member will have an opportunity to debate. The member for Roseau North, you cannot be disturbing and distracting the house. The aside is just too much. Too much. So I'm cautioning you, you'll have an opportunity. It's a debate. It's a debate. So you'll have an opportunity.
You know, Mr. Speaker, we have to continue the work of this government. It is imperative that we stay focused on what we have to do. And this is what this government has done, Mr. Speaker. And the members of the opposition, Mr. Speaker, cannot say thank you to the People's Republic of China for the contribution that that country is making to the forward movement of Dominica as a country, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the leader of the opposition is yet to come here, and the members of the opposition to distance themselves from a statement made, Mr. Speaker, by a head honcho of the United Workers' Party, who said that the People's Republic of China will come back and they will seize everything they give to Dominica. I mean, what ludicrous statement is that, Mr. Speaker? The People's Republic of China, when the government first established relations with the People's Republic of China, they said that the memorandum of understanding was fake, Mr. Speaker. The People's Republic of China came here, they did the Windsor Park Stadium free of charge, Mr. Speaker. They went on, Mr. Speaker, they criticized the State House. They criticized the State College, Mr. Speaker. The West Coast Road that links the city of Roseau to the town of Portsmouth. With the hotels and the kind of tourism infrastructure that we have now coming up in Portsmouth, Mr. Speaker. And I can go on and on and on, Mr. Speaker. They went to China, Mr. Speaker, eat the Chinese food. We saw them drink the Chinese drink, Mr. Speaker, and they come back here today and say that the Chinese will come back when they're ready to seize everything they give to Dominica. Mr. Speaker, that is the statement of the United Workers' Party. But I am happy, Mr. Speaker, that there are clear, prominent evidences of the benevolence of the People's Republic of China in Dominica and in my constituency, and there is more to come. And I welcome the establishment of the Agricultural Center in 1 Mile Portsmouth, Mr. Speaker, which will help to further boost the agricultural sector by providing the seedlings and the planting material for the resurgence and the resuscitation of the agricultural industry as we see today, Mr. Speaker. That was the party that was championing the agricultural sector. The bulk of their support before the last election came from the agricultural belt, yet they criticized the investment being made in the agricultural sector, Mr. Speaker. They criticized that, and they are yet to distance themselves from that statement. But I want to let the People's Republic of China know that this government stands resolute in support of the One China policy, Mr. Speaker. That is what we'll continue. So when the leader of the opposition talk about agriculture to secure health and wellness, well, that is what we are doing. That's what we are doing, investing in agriculture. The World Bank program, Mr. Speaker, will pump millions of dollars into the hands of the farmers, Mr. Speaker, so that they can go back to their farms. Right now, Mr. Speaker, we have markets in every single regional country, Mr. Speaker, outside of Dominica. We have boats going to Martinique, to Barbados, to Trinidad, to Guadeloupe, Antigua, Saint Martin, Mr. Speaker. I implore the farmers to go back to your field and plant. There is an outfit in Antigua asking us for all of the plantains that we can supply, Mr. Speaker, to make plantain chips. Yesterday, I got a call from an outfit in Miami asking us for all of the toloma, the arrowroot that we can produce, and we are giving support to the arrowroot producers in La Plaine for that purpose, Mr. Speaker. All over the country, Mr. Speaker, we are assisting in toloma production, in faring production, in bay oil production, Mr. Speaker, in fresh produce, Mr. Speaker, not only for our local Dominican consumption to guarantee food security, but we are feeding the region. And the COVID-19 pandemic gave us an ideal opportunity to take advantage of those markets, Mr. Speaker. So all our farmers have to do, and the member for Roseau North and a former member who is now in South Sudan said that they were trying some huckstering outfit some years ago. And Jigjodi, we don't know how much they ship, what they generate, and where they send the stuff to, Mr. Speaker. The owing farmers, go and pay the farmers the monies that you got. Go and pay the farmers. Go and pay the farmers, Mr. Speaker. $13 million for the tissue culture facility at 1 mile. The tissue culture facility will produce the top quality planting material that we need, Mr. Speaker, in our quest to continue to develop the agricultural sector and the agricultural industry. That is what we are doing. $440,000 invested in the fisheries sector. And one of the fisheries complexes is in my constituency, and that is one of the fisheries outfits, Mr. Speaker, that generates the most fish catch. I can stand there without any fear of contradiction, Mr. Speaker, and say that my fishermen in the Portsmouth constituency are among some of the best fishers in Dominica, Mr. Speaker, to the point where we are exporting fish right now to Saint Martin and Antigua, Mr. Speaker. And you see, that is one of the that's how God works in mysterious ways, Mr. Speaker. But because what the COVID-19 pandemic has done, because it shut down the entire global chain, Mr. Speaker, the fishers up in the north cannot or are not fishing as much as they would like. So all of the archipelagic species, Mr. Speaker, are coming further down south into the warm weather, Mr. Speaker. That's what they're doing. So right now, Mr. Speaker, in Dominica, yellowfin tuna, aka tor, is $5 a pound, Mr. Speaker. That is the work of this government because we invested in the fishing sector. That is what we are doing, Mr. Speaker. We've invested in fads. We've invested in boats, Mr. Speaker. We've invested in engines, and there is more of that to come under the World Bank Agricultural Investment Facility, Mr. Speaker. That is the work of this government. Vision, foresight, planning. This is what this budget speaks to, Mr. Speaker. And we're not only doing that.
9 more minutes.
Thank you, Mr. We're not only doing that, Mr. Speaker, in our constituencies. We're not playing politics with that. We invest in all over the country, Mr. Speaker. The China Friendship Hospital is in the Roseau North constituency, and I know that the member for Roseau North will congratulate and compliment not only the government of the People's Republic of China, but the government of Dominica, Mr. Speaker, for fulfilling that project, Mr. Speaker. That's what we are doing. Mr. Speaker, the Marigot Hospital and the Marigot Health Center, Mr. Speaker, is in the Marigot constituency. Mr. Speaker, that is what this government is doing for the people. Mr. Speaker, the Salisbury Primary School that was completely refurbished and rebuilt, Mr. Speaker, is in the Salisbury constituency. So every constituency, and I may even go as far as saying every community in Dominica is being touched by the benevolence of this Labour Party government. That is what we are doing, Mr. Speaker. We'll continue, and I'm happy that the Prime Minister spoke about the privatization of the abattoir, because that is a great opportunity for a private person. And you see how we are private sector driven, Mr. Speaker. We are private sector friendly. We do not get involved in private sector business, Mr. Speaker. During 95 to 2000, Mr. Speaker, there were ministers of government ordering pipes for the OASCO through their private business. That's the legacy of United Workers' Party, Mr. Speaker. But we are not involved in that. We are making funding and resources available to the private sector of Dominica, Mr. Speaker. That is what we are doing. So that the private sector can drive growth in this country, growth and development. That is what we are doing, giving the private sector the opportunity. And I'm so excited, Mr. Speaker, about the digital revolution that is taking place in Dominica. And that has been put into the capable and energetic hands of a young, brilliant, Mr. Speaker, Senator Larry. Because we have to move with the information age. And we saw it. The Ministry of Education did a brilliant job during the COVID-19 pandemic with the students, our primary school students. Mr. Speaker, my daughter is 8 years old, Mr. Speaker, and everything that the Ministry of Education was sending at them was on computer. I had to go and buy a laptop for the child, Mr. Speaker, because the teachers and the students were sending the lessons for the students on the computer, on IT, and so on. I'm saying this is the Dominica of the future. When I read the manifesto, and I come now and I read the budget, I'm saying that is the direction in which we want the country to go. Taking advantage of the opportunities that are available for the development of the information technology sector, Mr. Speaker, in every aspect of our development. And that is what we are doing. We are creating the dynamic Dominica that we speak of. Is not just a myth. It's not just an idea in our mind. It's a place that we actually want to get to. Dynamic Dominica, Mr. Speaker, is a particular stage of our development where we will be a shining example, not only for the rest of the region, but in fact for the rest of the world, Mr. Speaker. And this budget sets the foundation for the realization of that dream, Mr. Speaker. That's what we're doing. We set it up, innovation campuses, and I am the minister responsible for innovation, and that is why I'm excited about that. So places like the Dominica State College can team up with the Bureau of Standards, can team up, Mr. Speaker, with all the brilliant IT minds. We have young people in Dominica, Mr. Speaker, creating programs at their home, computer programs at their home. We want them to put them in one setting, Mr. Speaker, where they can address the challenges, the economic and social challenges that we have. They can sit down and they can create an app, Mr. Speaker, to tell us when to plant, when to harvest, when to fertilize, Mr. Speaker. They can sit down and create an app and tell us how to fight black cigatoka, Mr. Speaker. They can sit down and create an app and tell us how to track the geology of the rivers, Mr. Speaker, so we can know water flow. We can know where the danger spots are in times of natural disasters. That is what, Mr. Speaker, the innovation campus will do. It will create a Silicon Valley in Dominica for the rest of the Caribbean, Mr. Speaker. That is what we want to do. That is what we want to do. So in the next 5 years, Mr. Speaker, Dominica will be the example for the rest of the Caribbean and the rest of the world.
3 more minutes.
Mr. Speaker, no, I don't need more time. Mr. Speaker, that is what we are doing. So when we stand there 5 years from now, Mr. Speaker, the rest of the world will look at us and say, yes, here is a small island developing state that has set the example, that has created the benchmark, Mr. Speaker, that is a shining model for what small island developing state development is all about. In agriculture, in infrastructure, in healthcare, Mr. Speaker, in tourism. That is what we are doing, every single aspect, taking us from the stage where we were totally devastated by the recent Hurricane Maria and COVID-19 and building a foundation, a lasting, sustainable development model for future generations to follow, Mr. Speaker. That's what we are doing. And we know that the people of Dominica are with us because they have shown us that they are with us. They have given us the mandate, so we should sit back. We should continue to remain disciplined, and we have the blueprint in the budget. We have drafted it, and it's not by accident. If you look at the manifesto and you superimpose this budget on the manifesto, you know we're on the right track. And you know we must succeed, as the Prime Minister said we will, because we have shown in the past that we are successful. We have shown in the past we built the Kapinski Hotel, Mr. Speaker, right there in Portsmouth. The opposition didn't support us. They said that we were taking part of the swamp to the national park. Thank you. They're taking the national park, Mr. Speaker. We built the Kapinski. Mr. Speaker, Jungle Bay was destroyed in Petit Savant Point Millet. Go to Jungle Bay today, the work of this government, Mr. Speaker. Go to Salisbury on Grand Savannah, Mr. Speaker, and the Hilton Hotel is rising like a phoenix from the ashes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, every single investment in Dominica, I'm subject to correction, every single investment, especially in the tourism sector, Mr. Speaker, is done by a Dominican, a local Dominican national, Mr. Speaker. Every single private sector business, Mr. Speaker, in Dominica is done by locally born Dominicans. There is nowhere else in the region you can find that persons have invested in their country like that. And that is a sign of a strong economy, Mr. Speaker. That is a sign of confidence in the economy. When you have places like Do It Center being open, Fresh Market being open, the Treads being open. I mean, I can go on and on and on, Mr. Speaker. Other businesses expanding. Look at the pharmacy, what is it called? Jolly's Pharmacy just opened a mega store there last week, Mr. Speaker. These are investors, local investors who have confidence in the economy. They know where the government is going. They know the direction we are taking. And they know, based on the past reputation of this government, that the future is bright under the Dominica Labour Party. Mr. Speaker, there is not much more for me to say or for me to add, but to really commend and congratulate from the leadership, the leader, to the collaborators, all of the ministers and the parliamentary representatives, the senators, and the public servants for putting together what I think is a budget for the time in which we live, responding to the needs of the Dominican people, Mr. Speaker, being resilient, Mr. Speaker. That is what this budget is all about. I thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, I move that this honorable House be suspended until 3 o'clock this afternoon.
It has been moved and seconded that this House be suspended until 3 o'clock this afternoon. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. The House stands suspended at 3 o'clock this afternoon. Till 3 o'clock, 29th July 2020.